Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. Today is October 7th, 2025, marking 2 years since the horrific attack by Hamas against Israeli civilians and military targets. That small list of targets is actually important because it encompasses the several aspects of October 7th. The ones that were major war crimes, which are all attacks on civilians, including killing, sexual assault, other assaults, um, the property damage, etc., as well as all acts of kidnapping, whether of military or civilian personnel. Kidnapping is a war crime. And those that are permitted to people resisting occupation and war crimes committed by an apartheid state for decades against them. It is not true that violent resistance to Israel's occupation and it's the siege that it imposed on Gaza after it supposedly withdrew, and in fact withdrew its settlements and its military from within Gaza and simply controlled Gaza from the outside, thereby remaining the occupying power. Um, it is not true that that cannot be resisted with arms and with violence. If that was illegal, then the American Revolution was illegal. Um, it is perfectly justifiable. Now, whether it makes sense or not is something that the occupied people have to decide and debate among themselves whether it's wise, because generally speaking, when you're occupied, you don't have the strength of arms. So it's a debate and a discussion, but it is certainly not the case that Palestinians did not have a right to armed resistance. That being said, they also um, are not that right to armed resistance does not imply that you can do anything, that anything is okay, that there are no limits, and those limits were vastly exceeded and horrifically so on October 7th, 2 years ago. But today also marks 2 years since the beginning of a genocide that had no justification whatsoever. Let's be very, very clear. Look, in the real world, Israel does not actually have a right against of self-defense against people that it occupies. It does have a right to keep its citizens safe. In fact, it has a responsibility to do so. It also has a responsibility, incidentally, for the safety and security of those it holds under occupation. It has a right under a responsibility under international law to ensure their welfare as long as the occupation lasts, however long the occupation lasts. And Israel has, of course, shirked that responsibility from day one. In fact, the opposite has made the occupied people's lives absolutely miserable. But let's be very, very clear. Um, while in the real world, look, we can't expect an event like October 7th to happen, and for any state, Israel or any other state, to not respond militarily and probably insanely in some way. We've seen that many, many times in history. Is certainly the best example of the United States itself on after September 11th and launching a global war that killed millions and millions of people who had nothing to do with the attacks on September 11th. Um, but this wasn't about self-defense from the very beginning. This was about Israel saying, we are not going to have Palestinians in Gaza anymore. Look, Gaza has been a seat of resistance against Israel since before there was an Israel. It was always um, the hotspot, if you will, of resistance, partially because even in its earliest days, it had limited resources. Was near Egypt, and after Israel was created, it was held in a certain economic limbo that impoverished it even further. It's a long story, but Gaza was always the place for a more, shall we say, radical approach toward dealing with the Nakba. And Israel decided to jump on the excuse provided by the October 7th attack to say Gaza will not be that anymore because Gaza will be empty of Palestinians after this. It does look like that ambition has failed. but but it's failure came at a price that is beyond imagining. So that's what today, marks a reflection of, and we need to look back at that. And I was struck. I saw a quote from the Israeli expat and activist Amidar, who has done a lot of good work in the progressive world. And what he said for this day was, and I'm quoting here, freedom, dignity, and security for all, not just for my people or for yours, for all. And, ideally, one would like to say that. But of course, the statement itself, while I admire the spirit, I respect the sentiment, but it has a certain both sidesiness to it that sort of elides what is at the root of the conflict. And I don't think that's what his intention was, actually. Although he is Israeli, his history shows he has a little better understanding of, than that. Though I would certainly, uh, you know, say he is still very much an Israeli. But on the other hand, my colleague, Idris Ahmad, a professor at the University of Essex, articulated a view that I think much more closely reflects my own in response to Amidar's statement. And on a second, I'll call it up here for you if I can coordinate my. Be really nice to have help with this stuff, wouldn't it? Um, Sorry. So, yeah. So here is what Idris had to say. Amidar is a good man. So were Vivian Silver and Bilha Inyon and Yacobi Inyon. As it happened, I knew Vivian Silver, and she was certainly a good woman. Bilha and Yacobi Inyon were two people who were all, along with Vivian, killed on October 7th, and all believe very strongly in a just, not just coexistence with Palestinians, but a just coexistence with Palestinians. And so he just goes on. They had dedicated their lives to Palestinian rights, and their sons continue that legacy, which is also true. They were among the civilians killed on October 7th. We are all enraged by the ongoing genocide in Gaza, and there is no relief for the people of Gaza, who have already lived through 77 years of dispossession, terror, repression, and occupation. I don't have to be a Palestinian to be outraged by the targeting and killing of civilians in Gaza, and I don't have to be a Jew to find the logic of collective punishment equally wrong applied the other way. I condemn all war crimes, including Hamas's. This is not a both sides argument. I hold Israel fully responsible for the occupation and genocide. And I think I'm going to pause here because I think that's an important point. What Idris is saying is by pointing to the occupation and the genocide. He talks about he's saying there is no excuse for the genocide in Gaza, but he's also pointing to what is the root of all of this. And he points to the occupation, without which, one can argue, certainly, I think, that the issue of the dispossession of Palestinians before the occupation began might, we don't know, but might have been resolved by now in some way or another that allowed Palestinians to have a life again and freedom again and self-determination again and all their national rights again. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. The occupation certainly has prevented that from happening for the 58 years that it has been in existence. It just continues, but a right to resist occupation doesn't license the killing or kidnapping of civilians. I mourn for all the innocent victims. I mean, how do you argue with that? I mean, a lot of people will, but I think that pretty much sums up my feelings. We need to speak of the importance of recognizing all the tragedies because, yes, we need to, and I'll get to this in a moment. We need to understand the difference between what Israelis have experienced, as bad as bad as that can be in some cases, compared to, but compared to the horror of Gaza, where people have not just been killed, maimed, seen their children killed and maimed, but everything about Gaza is gone. All the homes are gone. The institutions are gone. The infrastructure is gone. The hospitals are gone. The schools are gone. The mosques are gone. The history is gone. Gaza has been destroyed. So, within that, we don't have to lose that to understand that also an Israeli parent who has been sitting and seeing their son or daughter languish in captivity in Gaza for the past 2 years, that is a nightmare. It is. It is a nightmare. It's a horrible thing to experience. And we need to try and maintain empathy for that as well. We need to have the empathy for every family member, everyone who lost a family member or a close friend on October 7th, or who had a family member, close friend, injured very badly on that day, or kidnapped on the day. We need to have that compassion. It's important if we're ever going to resolve this. That being said, the difference in scale and context cannot and must not be lost. We can and must address the root causes of this conflict. And that, when we talk about root causes, Idris pointed to the occupation. I would point to the dispossession of the Palestinian people in a settler colonialist process to make way for an apartheid Jewish supremacist state. And that is the Nakba. It is a context that must be understood and accounted for. We have to understand that everything that's happening is placed within that context. You can look, this is not unique to Palestine. Dispossessed people throughout history have been the cause of conflict because they are dispossessed, because they want their homes, they want their lives. Why should I have a life and somebody else not? Because they are Palestinian. That is profoundly unfair, and I certainly don't expect a Palestinian to take that quietly. So, as the renowned Palestinian human rights attorney Noura Erakat made clear in her testimony before the Security Council just yesterday, it's a context that must be understood and accounted for, but in reality, it's a context that is not just ignored, it is actually trampled upon. Let's take a look and see, you know, very clearly what Noura said. So Noura points out that Palestinians have a right to self-determination in our ancestral homeland, a homeland that has etched the shape and color of our embroidered dresses, that has entwined our family lineages through marriage, that has flavored our most exquisite dishes with the bite of pomegranate molasses and the tang of green olives harvested in the fall, a homeland that has provided grammar for our poetry and holy sites for our worship and pilgrimage. Our survival cannot be conditioned on surrendering our right to build a collective future on this land which makes life worth living. And our refusal to surrender is precisely why this campaign, referring to the Israeli campaign of genocide in Gaza and in the West Bank, aims to destroy the Palestinian people. Again, I mean, I think she says it quite correctly. I don't think there's any way that we can avoid the reality of Palestinian dispossession and Palestinian oppression and Palestinians having been turned en masse into a refugee population, often in their own homeland. One of the striking characteristics of Gaza is that it is overwhelmingly populated by refugees. It was so before October 7th. It has been for many, many decades since the Nakba began. There are also many, many refugees in the West Bank. Now, there are also Palestinian refugees all throughout the Middle East. There are Palestinian refugees all throughout the world who are who either themselves have been forced to leave by Israel or whose ancestors were forced to leave by Israel. And this is, of course, the crux of the issue. And it's also that piece of the issue that no American or Israeli ever wants to talk about. The price of not talking about it is October 7th. Okay, and yes, Israel and the United States can turn around and say, well, fine, then they're going to do it on October 7th. We're going to we're going to respond as we have in Gaza, but only worse next time. And that may be true, but is that really the future that anyone wants? Is that who Israel wants, the Israelis want to be? Is that who supporters of Israel want their Israeli cousins, my Israeli cousins, to be? 2 years after the horrors of October 7th, and after 2 years of a genocide whose cruelty and sadism are impossible to describe with mere words, I've tried. As those of you who follow me know, I've tried, and the words just fall short. We need some hope. Contrary to Donald Trump's 20-point plan, it won't stop merely by ending the genocide with a deal that cements and institutes the subjugation of Palestinians and the deprivation of their rights, because that's what Trump's plan does. Trump's plan essentially calls for endless occupation. Um, it institutes a governance structure whereby Palestinians never govern themselves until some theoretical far off date, which is, of course, going to be up to Israel to decide if it's there, which means it'll never come. It reinstitutes British colonialism by putting Tony Blair at the head of it, in partnership, of course, with Trump, so he can find some beachfront property to build some resort on. It's not going to stop it. It's not going to bring security to Israelis, and is obviously not going to stop the genocide of Palestinians. It'll alter it, but the slow killing of the Palestinians as a people, the shattering of of Palestinian culture, of Palestinian bonds, that was going on before October 7th. October 7th gave the Israeli right, that happened to be in power at the time, the Israeli far right, a community I come from. I know these folks. I know exactly what they were thinking. When that happened, the people who love Bezalel Smotrich, the people who love Itamar Ben-Gvir, the people in Likud who are the most like those folks, which are a great many, by the way, not all of Likud. There is some degree of a spectrum in Likud. But again, let's remember the response to October 7th, that stretched well into the opposition as well. Um, most of the opposition parties have been okay with most of what's gone on. And their biggest problem has been the neglect of the hostages. But certainly the far right seized an opportunity on October 7th to say we can actually finally finish the job we started in 1948 and destroy the Palestinians as a people. And sure, there would still be some Palestinians, and we'll be so nice and generous and allow them full citizenship can vote and everything and come to court and have a driver's license and have a yellow plate on your car instead of a green and white one. Um, because there'll be so few Palestinians left in the region, in what was Palestine at that point in their vision, that they can afford to be so magnanimous. This was the opportunity they saw, and they seized it. And it has been nothing but bloodshed in the worst way ever since. Some of you may have seen the piece I wrote earlier today about Van Jones joking about dead Gazan babies, as he put it. And like I'm sure many of you who are watching this, for the past 2 years, I have seen an unrelenting stream of, yes, dead Gaza babies. And they've come from sources that I absolutely know and trust, and I'm sure many of you do too. Which we have to say just because of these absurd accusations that they're all being made up by Qatar and Iran. Uh, I don't know how people sleep. I don't. I know I have a hard time with it. Um, and we can't have this anymore. If we're to hold on to any of our own humanity, we can't allow this to continue. The only way it stops is by really dealing with the issue. Okay. Look, there are Israelis, people can look to say, oh, we're going to get all the Zionist immigrants that came after, whatever, 1904. Um, and they have no right to be here anymore, and they need to leave. It's not going to happen. They're going to be there. Israeli Jews are going to be there. Palestinians are going to be there, as the Israeli right has found out, because the one thing about Trump's plan is that it does seem to signal the failure of the Israeli attempt to expel all the Gazans. They probably haven't given up on it yet, and it may well still surface in some way that is even maybe even more threatening and more awful, although that's hard to imagine. It's not like Trump's going to be very vigilant about the well-being of Palestinians. But um but for the moment it looks like they have been thwarted, at least in that. And the price of that thwarting, though, is intolerable. It is in the tens, possibly hundreds of thousands of deaths of innocent people, of babies, of children, of women, of men. And it has it we have to be determined that not just the genocide stops, but that this entire issue somehow gets resolved. I don't see an option for that. I don't see how we do anything else but that. Um, we can look again at the words of the Palestinian author, Gazan author, Lestia Alakad, and I think she sums it up brilliantly. History didn't start on October 7th, 2023. It's been 2 years of the genocide, but it's been 77 years, if not more, of the ongoing Nakba that started in 1948. Exactly. And that is what needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed in a real way. It needs to be addressed in a way that affirms Palestinian peoplehood, Palestinian humanity, Palestinian rights, and the Palestinian right to a goddamn ton of reparations. Um, this isn't just about signing some peace deal between an Israeli prime minister and an American president, or even an Israeli prime minister and a Palestinian Authority president who has been co-opted and corrupted beyond recognition. This is about paying back the Palestinians for what's been done to them, and thereby helping them, giving them the resources to establish the nation and the institutions that they want in whatever formation. It can be a confederation, it can be two states, it can be one state, it can be whatever. That isn't the issue. The issue is allowing Palestinians to build a future in a way that is fully human and addresses, to the extent we can, perfect justice is never possible, but to the extent we can, addresses the just claims of Palestinians. It's time to grapple with these realities, because 2 years is more than enough of genocide. And one attack like October 7th should be more than enough for Israelis and people who care about Israelis or people who support Israel. Enough is enough. Enough is way more than enough. We have seen the worst horror of the 21st century in Gaza. It's time to grapple with the realities that are at the core of this issue. And yes, make amends for them. Make amends for them as Jews, as Israelis, as Americans, as Europeans, all the people, as well as the Arab states that have sold out Palestinians from time immemorial. The world owes Palestinians, and Palestinians should be in some way receiving reparations for this. This isn't about compensation. This isn't about paying them off. What's enough? This is about reparations, and it's about building a Palestinian future that everybody can live with. Because the truth of the matter is, if you want more October 7th, then keep oppressing people, whether it's the Palestinians, the Lebanese, the Iranians, whoever. If that's how you treat people around you, that is how you will be treated. And after 2 years since October 7th, it's maybe time that we also figured that out. Thank you for listening. I hope you take this to heart. If you can support this work, please go to mitchellplutnik.substack.com, where you can become a paid subscriber, or you can make recurring and one-time donations. This is how I make my living, folks. So if you can support this, please do. And let's all hope that this is the last October 7th anniversary video that anyone ever has to make. Thank you.